Hello everyone, welcome to this meeting of the Francis Bacon Society. I'm Bryony, I'm the webmaster of the Society, so I might have been in touch with some of you by email before. This is the second of two talks by Peter Dawkins on the twin statues at Wilton House and Westminster Abbey. Peter Dawkins is the founder-director of the Francis Bacon Research Trust, and he's also a long-standing member of the Francis Bacon Society. He's also the author of many wonderful books, many Baconian books, including the Shakespeare Enigma, which is recommended reading for all Baconians. Excuse me, last time we heard Peter talk about the Dark Twin, which is the Wilton House Shakespeare Memorial. And in this concluding part, we'll hear his thoughts on the Light Twin, the Westminster Abbey monument. So please welcome Peter Dawkins.
Well, thank you, Bryony, and hello, everybody. It's very nice to be here again and to talk about these two amazing memorials that were put up in the 18th century. Memorials to the author, William Shakespeare. So last time I talked about the one at Wilton House. This time it's going to be more about the one at Westminster Abbey. But I'm going to recap a few of the things I said last time. A, because some of you weren't here last time, but also B, it gives a better introduction to the Westminster Abbey Memorial. And also what I repeat is very important, to grasp. It's like, well, a wonderful mentor to me was Sir George Trevelyan. He said, if it's worth saying 3 times. Well, I'm just going to say it twice. But 3 times is, it's good, and then you kind of remember then. So these two memorials are put up in the 18th century in memory of what we call the England's bard. He's become a folk hero, basically. He's built into our mythology. I call it mythology. I expect most of you do too. It's not necessarily true history that's put out, it's a myth. But myths are like allegories. They have layers and layers of meaning, and you take it as you like it. You can enjoy it at whichever level you like it. But I'm one of those who like to go a bit deeper and find out more what's underneath. And obviously you are too, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And then we get to understand who the main author might have been. The principal author, bard, may be helped by others. I think that was so. And then begin to understand why it was done in the first place. And then the sudden excitement, extra excitement comes because it leads into so many other avenues, extraordinary avenues of what was being done by a group of people 400 years ago in Elizabethan and Jacobean England to raise the consciousness of humanity. Not just then, but now. It's still going on. What they set in motion, and it has its time capsules or time, gateways, I guess. It's planned. As I see it, understand it's planned to unfold over a long period of time, little gateways, and you go through a gateway and suddenly something new is revealed, and you work with that for a bit, then another gateway, something new again is revealed, and so it goes on. And each time we evolve, as human beings, we evolve a bit further with it. And of course it brings up every time challenges too, because it means one has to change one's perceptions and consciousness as we go along. And unless you get practice at that, it can be a bit of a trouble. Oh, I don't want to change. I want to stay with something I'm happy with. But one of the things I've learned in my life is that it's quite good to get practiced at changes. Don't mind changes. Cope with them, celebrate them, and look forward to something better emerging after it. What in alchemy is called the alchemical death, leading to the resurrection. And in a way, this is what these statues, or one of the symbols that these statues is portraying, with this great mystery of death leading to resurrection. And of course, one of the greatest fears humanity has is fear of death. But if we can get over that and celebrate it and realize all the time, all our parts of our body are dying all the time. The cells of the body are dying all the time, but they renew themselves. And we evolve, we change. Hopefully we get wiser. That's the idea. So I'm going to start showing these slides. Here we are. They're the two memorials. So the one on your right as you look at it is the Westminster one, and the one on your left as you look at it is the Wilton House one. And I call them the the twins. They are done as twins, basically. And one is what I call the light twin and the other the dark twin. And it just happens the way they're placed, which I think is deliberately, it does give the impression of the light and the dark, the way they're placed in their different positions. So that I think was carefully done as well. The Westminster Abbey one was erected by public subscription in 1741. And it's created for the nation, and it stands in the place of honour in Westminster Abbey's south transept, which is known as Poets' Corner. And the idea for the statue is said to have originated with the men of the theatre, notably John Rich, manager of Covent Garden, in 1726. He had the idea in 1726. Now, what's that bring up to mind? Well, it brings up to mind the centenary of Francis Bacon's death. So why should he suddenly have this idea to put up a memorial to Shakespeare, the author, 100 years later? When you look at other things that came as centenaries of very important things of that Jacobean time that Bacon was involved in, you suddenly see important things, especially in Freemasonry, for instance, and so on. And in a way, this is connected with Freemasonry, which I'm going to show you towards the end of my talk. The two memorials were designed by the same architect and artist, which was William Kent. They're carved by the same famous neoclassical sculptor, Peter Scheemakers. And they were overseen by the same group of people that included Richard Boyle, 3rd Earl of Burlington, Alexander Pope, and Dr. Richard Mead. And all of them were authorities on both Shakespeare, the Shakespeare works, and on Bacon. Authorities. So if people want to know anything about Shakespeare, for instance, or Bacon, they go to one of those three people. And the two memorials, although similar to each other, they have differences that are both striking and meaningful. So as I talk, you can look more carefully at it and begin to spot the differences. So they're acting like twins, but you know, unless you're absolutely identical twins, most twins have, when they're born, they have differences between them, and even identical twins have different characters usually. And but they're still twins, they complement each other. And it's interesting, the Westminster one was deliberately designed and created, put up in Westminster Abbey for the general public. So it's put up in a church or a temple in a city. Well, the Wilton House one was created for a private family, and it's put up in a mansion house in the country. Doesn't that sound very deliberate? These two contrasts. And it gives you the idea of the temple, you know, is something to do with the divine, it's something to do with the immortal aspect of life, but the family is to do something very much with the human side of life, the mortal side of life, immortal and immortal. And then you suddenly get the idea these twin statues, they're twins, are being shown as the immortal, the one at Westminster, and the mortal, the one at Wilton House. And in classical myth, these twins, the immortal and the mortal, are celebrated as the Gemini twins, Pollux and Castor. Pollux the immortal, Castor the mortal. And they give rise, in the classics, the classical tradition gives rise to the idea of, when you combine the two in a perfect marriage, you have the idea of the mortal and immortal coming together in love, in a union, which is what the Gemini story gives. And they both become mortal immortals. They fuse together, as it were. And you get given the other way it's said, you become the Son of Man and Son of God. Where have you heard that before? Son of Man, Son of God. It's in the classical tradition, way before Jesus came. Jesus actually acted out this whole thing in his own way. Now, of course, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have another physical twin with you. In a deep level, it's referring to your mortal self and your immortal self. We have both. As Jesus said, we are gods. We're all gods, goddesses, walking on earth. But we just don't know it yet. To know it, you've got to manifest it in your life, in our lives. And to manifest that immortality, we have to manifest love. We have to live love, living truth. And then we know as Bacon said, you can't really know something unless you've done it, you've experienced it. You can understand something in your thoughts, but you've got to put it into action, experiment with it, if you like, and then you'll know whether it's true or not. So here you've got presented here, in these two twins, this deep, deep philosophy, this esoteric wisdom tradition being shown in these two statues, which, of course, just from what I've said, you can think of it, well, so what? I can't see it yet. But I hope as I go on, you'll see more and more in this. The Gemini and the idea of the immortal and immortal were also conveyed in tradition, in architectural tradition, sacred tradition, as the two great pillars that stand before the entrance of the temple. In Solomon's temple, they're called Jachin and Boaz. Jachin is associated with the light pillar, symbolized by the sun, and Boaz, which means matter, symbolized by the dark pillar on the left-hand side. Now that's right and left, just like we are. My right-hand side would be Jachin, left-hand side Boaz. So in Solomon's temple, as you approach the temple, you'd be seeing it as if you're seeing me, but this is my right hand, this is my left. But as you look at me, my right hand will be on your left as you look at it. You have to get used to that different way of seeing. As you approach the temple, the pillars will be on the other side to what, in our modern world, we would normally describe it. The pillars are seen as if you're in the temple looking out. You're in the temple, you are the temple. Looking out of the doorway, there's the right-hand pillar, there's the left-hand pillar. And that's how all sacred architecture should be understood. There is nowadays a mix-up with this when people looking at the Kabbalistic tree of life, they don't realize that most of the diagrams are shown, in most books at any rate, from what's called in Kabbalah from the back view. So you're looking at the back of the tree of life. To see it face to face, in Hebrew it's panim, see it face to face, you see truth face to face, then you switch the sides around. And I think a lot of writers of these books haven't realized what they're dealing with here, and so it can be confusing. But having said that, some of the later books and later things on the internet are showing it correctly, so they're picking up where the mistakes were in the past. We always correct things as we go along, don't we? Which is great. So as you can see, been looking at the pictures, the two statues show Shakespeare leaning on his right arm, right elbow, on three books, supported on a plinth, and his legs across, his right leg over the left leg, and the toe of his right foot pointed back towards his left foot. An extraordinary pose. The stance is a symbolic one, obviously. It's a symbol, and it's an old symbol. It's actually, one level, a symbol of melancholy, which in Elizabethan times they particularly focused on. A lot of the music was melancholic, to put you into that melancholic state. If you look at the Shakespeare plays, many of them start with the character saying, I'm in melancholy, or words to that effect. They're in that darkness, as it's called in alchemical tradition. They're in that dark space governed by Saturn, that melancholic state. It's not depression. Depression is a clinical problem. Melancholy is something we can all have. We've confronted with something and we really want to understand it, but oh dear. And it's a kind of melancholy, you go into this dark state, but then gradually something happens and we get lifted out of that. And it's said in alchemy, it's said that the Jupiter effect starts to come in, and a bit of the Mars zest, the zest that Mars can give, but particularly the Jupiter, the more jovial, happy side of it. And eventually you lift it up. You still got that Saturn with you, but you're lifting, as it were, out of that, with that Saturn, and turning that darkness of Saturn into light. So what's called Saturn becomes light at the end, becomes knowledge of truth. through the help of joviality. Well, Jupiter also in Kabbalah governs what's called mercy or compassion. So you have to start expressing love. You have to start loving. And of course, we can't know anything truly unless we love it. We've got to have some sort of rapport with something, some empathy, rapport, some heart feeling towards it, like with each other. You can't really get to know anybody, can we, unless we've got that sense of affection, sense of love, compassion. You know, in its height, it's compassion, mercy. And then you start to make friends. And then the friends start to reveal some of themselves to you. And so it grows and grows and grows. And that's the Jupiter side of it. And then the happiness comes. As well, Jupiter rules happiness, joviality. And then eventually you get the revelation, the illumination at the end of the day. A famous picture, that's the Gemini. I forgot to show you that one. The Gemini were known as the spear shakers. And it was a key theme in all of the Shakespeare works. The Gemini are key. You know, that's why you got the name Shakespeare. Shakespeare is the spear shaker. And the Gemini each was always shown carrying these spears, like Apollo and Pallas Athena. Spears which represent rays of light, and the light represents wisdom, which is love. Love shining out as wisdom to help transform and enlighten others. With our St. George figure, you've got the spear piercing the dragon. And the dragon represents the lower self, the mortal self. St. George represents the higher immortal self. That spear of light is coming down into us all the time, like as inspiration, really, divine inspiration, to wake us up and start to transmute us, transmute our consciousness to better things, better thoughts, better ideas, and better actions. It's a transmuting effect. So that's what these spears represented in the old days. So the dragon, in the St. George and dragon things, the dragon would eventually become the beautiful virgin. You know, the virgin's released from the dragon becomes the virgin. Then the virgin gives birth to the golden child. 3 stages of transformation or transmutation, all to do with the one soul. The one soul starts as a dragon self, then it becomes this more pure, beautiful, loving, kind person, represented by the virgin, and then suddenly the golden child of illumination. Three great stages of human evolution. But of course the imagery now is old, and many people don't like it, of course, because they think straight away, oh, poor dragon. Something like that, like with the Tempest, isn't it, with the Caliban. Most people sympathise with Caliban, whereas Prospero is doing his best to try and help Caliban become raised up higher and higher. And Prospero at the same time is learning how to do better. So the famous picture in Elizabethan days is this one, the young man among roses, which is probably Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. But it's a beautiful picture by Nicholas Hilliard. So there he is in the pose of melancholy, looking very melancholic, like that. So that's a classical pose. Then the other one's not so well known, unless you study Eastern traditions, and that is also the pose that Krishna takes when Krishna is creating. So he's playing his flute, which is a symbol of creativity. Of course, it makes people dance and so on, but that essentially Krishna is the same as Christ. It's playing the flute, like the pan flutes, to make all the energies of the universe dance and create wonderful forms of life and evolve those forms into more and more beauty and as one goes along. So it's a creative symbol. The melancholy become pure revelation and creative as Krishna. So that's a rather nice statue, I think of it. And the other thing about this pose, can I move over here? If you follow it, here you've got a figure of 8 form. And the figure of 8 is the symbol of the Holy Spirit. And it's also as a number. It's a very important number. It's a number of the sun, but it's also a number of Mercury. It's a solar symbol, but it's also associated with Mercury, the messenger, which at the highest level is what's called the Word of God. He speaks the Word of God. And so in tradition, Christ was known as Mercury. Mar-Keru comes from the Egyptian word Mar-Keru, which means true word. Mar-Keru, true word, that's what Mercury means. So this is a symbol of the Holy Spirit, which bears the word of God, the number 8. And then there's something even more shown in the Shakespeare statues, because you've got the idea here, there's the Holy Spirit bearing the word of God. But you've also got the rest of the body and the arm shaped like that. Switch it round the other way if you're looking at it from the back, and you've got the Chi-Rho symbol. Chi-Rho, the cross, and the rho, which is that shape. Here's the rho, and here's the cross, the Chi-Rho symbol. So there it's emphasizing that Mercury is Christ, which is Chi-Rho, represented by the Chi-Rho, the Christ symbol. See what I mean? In these statues, some very, very deep philosophy, deep wisdom buried in it for us to eventually uncover and get to know. Now, because most people understand, the right leg crossed over left like that represents a knight who's gone on a crusade. And so that's how you can understand it at that level. It's a knight who's gone on a crusade. But, Shakespeare wasn't a knight, as far as we know. Was he? And he didn't go on a crusade, Wonder about this, don't you? Because if you're taken on a spiritual level, a spiritual crusade is the quest for truth, to live in truth and to defend the truth. If you take it at the spiritual level. And those, going back to the more mundane historical side, those who are very famous for, being part of that these people who went on crusades was the Knights Templar, who kind of led the crusades and protected the pilgrims and so on. And so if you ever go to Temple Church in London, which was once the headquarters of the Knights Templars in England, you'll see in the round church these 10 tombs on the ground with these effigies on them, these 10 tombs. And they're all people, they weren't necessarily themselves Knights Templar, but they were patrons of the order. And very important to the order. They gave vast amounts of money and so on to maintain the order. But it's questionable whether they were actually, as human beings, people who went on a crusade as a Templar. But anyway, they are memorized in the Temple Church. And they're all their poses are slightly different. And that's another study in itself. But if you look at numbers 5, 6, and 9, they're the only ones who, there's another one too, but those 3 have the right leg crossed over the left leg. But they don't show the figure of 8. Got the right leg over the left, but don't show the figure 8 sign. Well, the right over left in that way just means, or should mean, that they've gone on a crusade. There's somebody who's gone on a crusade. So from my point of view, I would say those 3 human beings actually did go on a crusade out of all those 9. But if you look at number 8 on this, you'll see you got the Mercury sign, you got the number 8. Number 8 of these effigies, number 8 shows the 8. Isn't it interesting? Number 8 shows the 8. Somebody knew when they were doing this. They got the symbols there. The thing about the Templars, it's interesting. As you all know, as you study more and more of the Shakespeare and the Bacon works, you get into the whole Rosicrucian mystery. And the Rosicrucians are supposed to be very linked with the inner world and secrets of the Knights Templar, which they probably were, although there was more than that really for the Rosicrucians. But the Templars certainly had certain knowledges that were very, very important, which the outer church didn't like, so they got persecuted for it. But one of the things they got accused of when they were persecuted, the Knights Templars, was that they worshipped the god Janus, the head. But actually it's the head that looks to the left, to the right, and straight forward. That's the representation of Janus. Why were they associated with this classical symbol? We'll come back to that in a moment. Now, if you look at the 3 books on each plinth, why 3 books? And why on a plinth like that? Why didn't he have a bigger plinth? He was just putting his elbow on a bigger plinth. Why put the 3 books there? What's the 3 books saying? Shakespeare works aren't published in 3 books like that. Or if you count the two plinths, you've got 6 books. 6 very thick, heavy books. Why is this being shown? Well, once you're into the Bacon story, of course, you'll find this famous title page, the 1640 version of the Advancement of Learning, the English translation of the Latin, the last Latin version that Bacon did. And this very revealing picture, but there you can see 3 books on a plinth each side. So you've got the 2 pillars, the twin pillars there, the light pillar and the dark pillar, the sun pillar and the moon pillar. You can see the sun and moon above them. And then the 3 books on the plinth, on each plinth. And these 6 books in all represent the 6 books or stages of Bacon's great instauration. They're actual stages to go through, but he referred to them as 3 books to symbolize them. And he also calls them 6 days' work based on Genesis, the creative, the God creating the whole universe, creating everything in 6 days, and then the 7th day it's complete and there's a rest or enjoyment of it. So 6 days of work, and so Bacon bases his whole great instauration on this 6 days of work, which is creative. It's from the Bible. It's a great study to look into that. Well, this is being transferred to the idea of Shakespeare, these 2 twins of Shakespeare, leaning on 3 books on the pillars. Just to give you a little explanation of what the pillars mean, the right-hand pillar is called the sun pillar, or the pillar of light. Represents wisdom, light, spirituality, love, mercy, compassion, and it's associated very much with the heart. And it's called, in Solomon's temple tradition, it's called Yarkin, which is based on the word Yah, a name for God. And here Bacon calls it science. Why science? It gives you a clue to the great instauration, which I'll talk about another day for you if you like, but not here. It gives you a clue why the first 3 books should be associated with the wisdom pillar. And he calls them science. Well, science is knowledge. It's not philosophy, it's the finale of the philosophy, the knowledge we're going to get to. And the other pillar, the dark pillar, is the pillar of philosophy. And this is the moon pillar, associated with intelligence, the mind, with darkness, materialism, with judgment and severity. And sometimes it's symbolized, it represents the mind, but sometimes symbolizes an eye, representing the mind. And the mind is also the soul. It was understood in the old days, the mind is the soul. And you find this, Francis Bacon states something about that. The mind is the man. Man is what he knows. We are no more or no less than what we know. The mind, because that's all that survives. If we know truth, that becomes the immortal part of us. Anything we don't know truly is mortal, and doesn't go into immortality. It keeps changing its form until it becomes perfect, and then becomes immortal, and then you've got the illumination. what we know. We are what we know. It's quite a humbling thought, really. And that's knowledge of truth. And truth is love, as Jesus says, as Bacon says, all the great sages say, which comes straight out of the Orphic tradition. You know, you probably know that Jesus was a great Orphic initiate, and he reinterpreted for the Jews the Hebrew tradition, saying, you know, the Ten Commandments, they're all, you shan't do this, you mustn't do that, mustn't do that. Actually, what it means, he explained to the rabbis, what it means is love God, love each other. That's what it means. But a lot of people don't understand what love is. You can only tell them through the negatives. Love is not this, it's not that, it's not that. And that's often the only way we can learn as human beings. But Jesus came and said, no, this is what it really means. Love God, love each other. And of course, when one first hears about that, you think, oh, well, that's pretty simple. Can't be the truth, can't be the whole truth. But it's jolly difficult, isn't it? To love in every single situation we're in, with every person we meet, every, you know. Yes. This is a picture I like very much. It's a book published a bit later, 100 years later than Shakespeare time. It's from a German book. It's a book of wisdom. It's about the Rosicrucian knowledge and so on, and it's about the Kabbalah. But it shows very clearly the two pillars, J, B, Jachin and Boaz, with the sun above Jachin and the moon above Boaz. And you can see the words on each side that's associated with each pillar in tradition. And at the very top, you've got the Aish Mayim, which means air or ether, not the ordinary air we breathe, but something greater than that. It means spirit, basically. And the Mayim means water. And it's referring to the Spirit of God that moved upon the face of the waters, that initial polarity that sets everything in motion with movement. It moves upon the face of the water. And that polarity carries on in all life. All manifestation is only manifest because of continuing polarity. And as soon as you've got two poles, you've got the relationship between the two, which makes the Trinity, the third. And we all exist because of that. And it's all in motion, it's all in movement. So that's like what lies behind the idea of these two things. So you can see in this, you've got Westminster Abbey Memorial, Jachin, the Wilton House Memorial, Boaz. The sun and the moon. Each need each other. One can't exist without the other. That's so, so important. The immortal cannot exist without the mortal, and vice versa. It's a big lesson in life to come to that. And I must admit, I didn't come to that immediately. It took me quite a long time to accept that. To accept that thing. And you go back to look at the memorials again. The other striking thing about the memorials, you've got the left hand coming across the body of Shakespeare, and with the forefinger of the left hand pointing at a word on the inscription on the scroll. And the inscription on the scrolls are different. Each one is different, but they're taken from, each one is from a Shakespeare play. The Westminster Abbey one is taken out of the Tempest, and the Wilton House one is taken out of Macbeth. The Tempest one is about a mage, somebody who's working very much with the divine world. He's working with Ariel, his spirit. He invokes the divine world, honors that. And right at the beginning, he says, no harm is done. He doesn't intend harm to anybody in it. And in fact, at the end of the play, people have had their tests, challenges and so on, which we all do in life, but they've been initiated and brought up to a higher level. They've been transformed in some way to give them a fresh start to do things better in their lives than before. So it's very, very much this positive thing, something very wonderful, the spear of light, if you like, coming down to to transmute things. Whereas Macbeth is totally the opposite. There you've got the witchcraft and the invocation of absolute horrors. Lady Macbeth, in invocation of the evil, is most ghastly. I still can't listen to it now without shuddering. I find it very difficult to listen to Macbeth play because of what Lady Macbeth invokes. She's not invoking the gods and goddesses, she's invoking malice, awful things. And Macbeth, he's just a murderer, and listens to the dark witches, the dark ones. And he sets out to be a murderer. So you've got the two opposite, the light and the dark here, just in the way the inscriptions are chosen by the two plays. One's a comedy, one's a tragedy. One's about redemption, the other's about the karmic effects of getting things wrong, doing things badly, and so on. This shows you the inscription on the Westminster one. It's taken from the Tempest, from the Act 4, Scene 1, lines 146 to 158, if you want to look it up. And here I've written it down for you to look at. But it's a deliberate misquote. If you look at those two carefully, you'll see what's been written on the scroll at Westminster deliberate. That was done by Alexander Pope. And Pope was challenged about this at the time. He said, why have you done this? You've got it wrong. And you're the Shakespeare expert. You've just produced volumes of Shakespeare works. Why have you done this? And he said, it stands as I've put it. That's how it has to be. Why? Why did he do it so deliberately? It makes you really, really question it. So we'll come back to that in a moment. And then the Wilton House one, which we looked more at in the last talk, there it's a straightforward quote from Macbeth. Just a few lines chosen. So Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 5. But what's done is to split each line. In fact, the one on the memorial in Westminster Abbey has also split the lines. But here it's split the lines in that particular way. Life's but a walking shadow. New line, a poor player, and so on like that. Well, I won't go into that anymore because I did that in the last talk. But the thing about both quotes is that they're both talking about death, the nothing. They're referring to the death or the ending of actors and the dissolution of their form into the great no thing, the nothing, which often in Shakespeare is described as the O, the big O. Oh, it's the nothing, it's the darkness, the melancholy at one level, but the revelation at another level. Oh, in melancholy, and revelation, and so on. It could also be the R, the R, I like the R better, but anyway, the O represents the nothing. And then the other thing about the two inscriptions, I think I've got a picture of them both together. If you look at the Wilton House one first, you see it's about hearing. It's about sound and hearing. And thus is heard no more. Struts and frets, it's from the musical, playing a musical instrument. Strutting and fretting is are upon the stage, and then is heard no more. So it's to do sound and hearing. But when you compare it with the Westminster Abbey one, that's about vision, about seeing, and seeing a glorious vision. So one's about hearing, one's about seeing. The hearing one's associated with the left-hand dark pillar, the mortal pillar, and the right-hand one, the vision, is associated with immortality. And so on like that. Well, this actually is, in the mystery tradition, this is so. And a key example of this is when Jesus was talking to his the apostle who became his chief apostle historically, and that's the apostle who originally called Simon. And Simon means the one who hears. The one who hears. And Jesus said to Simon, who am I? Who do you see who I really am? And Simon said straight away, you are Christ. He could see in Jesus the Christ. And that's when Jesus said, blessed be you, you've seen the truth, your name is, from now on, is Peter. And Peter means the one who reveals the truth, the revealer, the one who can see the truth, reveal it, and he then becomes the Hierophant, because he hears the truth, he sees the truth, he knows the truth, and so he can speak the truth because of that. So he becomes the Hierophant, and the symbol of the Hierophant are the two keys, the gold and the silver keys. So you've got this put up here. In here, we're talking about a hierophantical imagery. And that's what the two Shakespeare statues are actually showing. Because if you look at the plinths that Shakespeare's leaning on, each plinth fundamentally has three heads or faces on it, just like Janus. They're Janus altars. One facing to the left, one to the right, and one straight ahead. In the east, it's equivalent to Brahma. Brahma has these three faces, as you can see. Also a fourth hidden one, but we never see that. But these three faces, it's a symbol of the creator, the one who creates. But in the classical tradition, it's Janus, the chief of all the Roman gods, the Roman pantheon. Janus. That's why we have January named after Janus, the god Janus, the one who starts everything off, the creator that creates everything else that comes. And this is also, this Janus is also associated or called not just the chief god of the Roman pantheon, but also the doorkeeper of heaven. This is why St. Peter was, in tradition, is called the doorkeeper of heaven. He has the keys of heaven, and he stands there like a judge to say who can come in and who's not yet ready for it. He's the Hierophant, the doorkeeper and Hierophant of the mysteries, who's able to look simultaneously into the past, the future, and the present. Past, future, present. These three ways. He's associated with time. If you go back to the idea of Brahma, who's also this, just a different name, the vehicle of Brahma is the swan, like the sweet swan of Avon. Why was Shakespeare called the sweet swan of Avon? You got this fundamental link. The vehicle, the symbolic form that Brahma takes to create everything. And that's, of course, that symbolic form is associated with the goddess Sarasvati, the feminine aspect of Brahma. Brahma sounds, the creative sound, and it's given form by the feminine aspect, Sarasvati. And she is the goddess of all the arts, particularly poetry and drama and language. So Shakespeare, the sweet swan of Avon. Janus is also known in Roman tradition as Saturnus or Saturn, Greek Kronos, the lord of time and space, the Hierophant, the initiator, teacher, and tester. That's what a Hierophant does. He initiates, he teaches, and he tests. Holder of the gold and silver keys, the doorkeeper of the mysteries. And particularly if you look just at the Westminster Abbey one, you can see him standing in front of a doorway. Once you start to see this, it becomes so clear, isn't it? And the doorway to the mysteries. Actually, it's interesting where it's been placed. The monument effectively has divided the south chancel into two parts. If you go behind that monument on the northern side of it, you find there's a doorway there leading out to the north, which is the doorway that only the king or queen can use, that goes to the palace, Westminster Palace. That was built specifically for royalty. Unfortunately, nowadays it's become the door to the toilets, which is awful. People who don't know the symbolism of these things. But originally it was the royal door, so that the king or queen could come privately from the palace, without anybody seeing, and come in by that door and enter into the temple, into Westminster Abbey in that way. But so this doorway, from that point of view, has this association with the royalty, which in a spiritual way is the spiritual royalty, the divine world, the heavenly world. Now, going back to Francis Bacon, Francis Bacon says quite a lot about Janus, and he uses Janus as a symbol of the imagination. The imagination is the great faculty of the mind, by means of which we see anything. It's the only way the mind can see anything. The mind can hear, but it then has to see. Our souls or minds have to see the truth, and then we get a chance to know it. So Bacon knew this clue, so he talks about it a lot in his writings. He describes Janus as the doorkeeper between sense and reason. Sense is what we pick up from life and so on. We sense it and so on. Then we have to present it to the reason, to our thinking mind. Then we think about it, get the idea, but then we've got to put the idea into action. So then it becomes the mediator between the reason and the action, to put the ideas into action. So it's the doorkeeper between sense and between reason and action, enabling reason to intuit and interpret the feelings, and then to put the ideas into action. We're using this faculty all the time, but we don't realize it. Imagination is a real key. I was very upset in my younger days at school. I had a friend who really saw things very well, very deeply, and he mentioned it one day to the teacher, and she just said, "Oh, don't be so silly, it's just your imagination." As if the imagination's stupid. And he shut off all his faculties from then on. And I remember thinking at that time, she doesn't know what she's saying. The imagination is something very good. All that we should test is whether we are imagining true things or false things. That's all we have to test. But the imagination itself as a faculty is vital to us as living human beings. Now, Bacon goes further. He links imagination to poetry. You can't produce good poetry without the imagination. And by poetry, or poesy as it's spelt, it includes dramatic poetry or drama. And and this, as you read more into him and then you experience it yourself, it's the means to raise human consciousness to higher levels so that we might comprehend the higher laws or truths of life. And in fact, you find in his Great Instauration, he refers to three things: the history, which is gathering your experience, your facts, and observations of and experiences of life. You gather that together as a history. Then you've got to present it to the mind so that the mind can think about it. That's the philosophical stage. So he talks about the history and philosophy. And the third is poetry. Where does poetry come into it? Well, it's the means to raise the history to the mind that it might be seen, so we get the ideas, and then the means to put those ideas into action. Poetry, key to the Great Instauration. That's why modern science hasn't really got there yet, but it can get there. But this is the extra key if one's going to work with Bacon's Great Instauration properly, is to understand the value and the importance of poetry and the importance of the imagination, our creative faculty of imagination. So just to remind you, Janus is Saturn, and that's time, Lord of time and space. The one who is the past, present, and future. Janus is the mind, intelligence, man, that can become illumined. And Bacon's quote, I was going to tell you, is about this, is my praise shall be dedicated to the mind itself. The mind is the man, and the knowledge is the mind. A man is but what he knoweth. The mind itself is but an accident to knowledge, for knowledge is a double of that which is. The truth of being and the truth of knowing is all one. The truth of being and the truth of knowing is all one. Alpha and Omega, where the Omega is the knowledge of the Alpha, and therefore it becomes an Alpha itself. And therefore that's when you get the key symbolism used in the Shakespeare plays and Bacon works and Rosicrucian works generally, their signature key of the double A, AA, means Alpha Omega, but where Omega has become the true knowledge of the Alpha. One is the same as the other, the double A. Bacon also shows it in his wonderful New Atlantis, first edition, shows the emblem on it of hidden truth brought forth by time. Truth is known as the daughter of time. Interesting, that. But there is time, Father Saturn, also like Pan, because Pan's another word for the same thing. Pan, Saturn, Krishna, time, Janus. All one being, bringing forth the truth out of the darkness into the light, so that it might be known.
Look how similar the time's posture is to the statue. Peter, did you notice that?
No, I didn't.
The leg crossed over, the arm held up, holding the spear, and the arm coming across to the maiden's hand.
Ah, thank you.
It's the same, isn't it?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's great.
It's the same.
It is the same. Can I get back to the statue picture? Yeah,
Oh, no, the legs are different.
legs are different, but
The upper arms.
but the arms coming across that way and grasping the truth. Yes, so it gives. And actually, that's exactly what the left arm of Shakespeare's doing in the monuments. It's actually pointing at these messages which give you some real truths in them. Brilliant. Now, if we look at the plinths themselves, the Westminster one, we looked at the Wilton House one last time. So here's the three heads, the Janus altar, and they're actually heads of sovereigns that are mentioned in the Shakespeare plays. And they can be recognised because they're based on paintings or on original portraits of the sovereigns. So that you've got the head of Queen Elizabeth is in the light. On the right-hand side of the monument, left-hand side as you look at it, but the right-hand side of the monument, the head of Queen Elizabeth in the light. And Richard III is in the shadow. He's the other side, on the left-hand side in the shadow. And facing straight ahead of you, you've got Henry V. Elizabeth I is recognised possibly from the panel portrait of her in the Petrarchan Triumph of Eternity, painted about 1620, or from a Nicholas Hilliard woodcut or a Phoenix medal. You know, she's very recognisable, really. And she's included, it's not a play named after her, but she's actually included in Shakespeare's very last play, Henry VIII, which is also known as All is True. And she comes in as a baby. And she's the subject of a remarkable prophecy or oracle given by Archbishop Cranmer, who speaks of her as being that goodness, a pattern to all princes living with her and all that shall succeed, filled with wisdom and fair virtue and all princely graces. That goodness. So it's talking about something divine embodied in her, which is absolutely appropriate for her representing the right-hand side of this pillar. That the right-hand side are goodness, grace, and wisdom, the word of God or oracle. Richard III is from the official portrait of Richard in the Royal Collection, in which Richard is wearing the same jewel in his hat. And of course, the play itself, it may not be historically true, but Shakespeare's based his history on the history he had to do, the Tudor history of the time. But it's a study in sinister plots and machinations perpetrated by a highly intelligent man. And he's a warrior. And this is very fitting for the left-hand side of intelligence, judgment, and severity, which in Kabbalah is symbolized by the planetary symbol of Mars, the warrior aspect, also a symbol of judgment. And then Henry V is from the cover of the book De Regimine Principum, meaning of the regiment of princes, written by Thomas Hoccleve. It's an earlier book written in the, he lived between 1370 to 1450. So the face is the same as the face on this cover, but the crown and clothes are slightly different. And in the Shakespeare play, Henry V, he's made into an ideal king, isn't he? He's depicted as the ideal philosopher king, a perfect blend of wisdom and intelligence, a merciful ruler and a righteous warrior. So he's the balance between the left and the right. Merciful ruler and righteous warrior. He balances the two in a good way. He's representing the midpoint or middle pillar of harmony and beauty. It's called the middle pillar in tradition. Now if we look at the scroll, you can see the forefinger of the left hand of Shakespeare's pointing at the word temples. Now that's a good reminder of what I've shown here on this picture of the Shakespeare folio and the epistle dedicatory in the folio. Supposedly written by Hemming and Condell, but it's very erudite and been proven probably to have been penned by Ben Jonson and so on. It's based on the classics. But anyway, it says in this important sentence, and the most, though meanest of things, are made more precious when they are dedicated to temples. In that name, therefore, we most humbly consecrate to your Highnesses these remains of your servant Shakespeare. Temples. Usually we think of a temple as a word rather than a name. So it's interesting that you've got some sort of indication in that. And also it's a misquote. So what is going on? If you look carefully at the original, and what's on the memorial, you'll see, first of all, various things have been manipulated or changed to enable a wonderful cipher to emerge. And a lot of this is thanks to my good friend in the past, Thomas Bokenham, who is a great cipher person. And I worked with him a lot in the early days and learned a lot from him. He did a lot of cipher work, which is still a little bit unacknowledged. Wasn't all correct, of course, but that's how things go, isn't it? But some of it was absolutely spot on. And so I'm going to share some of this is from him. Some I've discovered myself, and some from others. So the first main thing is the fifth line of the original passage has been replaced, the fifth line, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, doesn't come into the quote on the monument, whereas it should do. It's been replaced with the first line of the original passage, and like the baseless fabric of this vision. So, why did Pope do that? Do that deliberate change, pretty massive alteration. And then he's altered the word this of this vision to an A, so it comes out as a vision. Not this vision, but a vision. You might think that's not so important, but it is. And then he starts the quote with the cloud-capped towers. Why start with that in the first place? But anyway, he starts with that, the cloud-capped towers, and then he shortens this original spelling of towers to TOW-RS. So he's taken a letter out of it. Why has he done that? He didn't have to. And he ends the quote at "leave not a rack behind." He doesn't go on any further. Why does he end there? Well, you could say there was a good reason for that, but anyway, it ends halfway through a line. And then he alters the spelling of the word rack to wreck, which is, of course, how we would pronounce it and spell it today. But that's not how it's spelt in the folio. Then he breaks up each line of the original passage into 2 lines, except for the line that's been moved. So unlike this insubstantial pageant, faded still stays as one long line, but all the other lines are broken into 2. And this makes 8 lines. Why was 8 lines important? And then he's indented the 6th line of the new arrangement, shall dissolve. You've got 2 words pushed, indented. Why has he indented it? It stands out. It stands out. It's a signal, gives a signal, such as a starting point or an ending point for a cipher, or for reading the text cryptically. And then he modernizes the spelling of some other words, and he capitalizes some words that were not originally capitalized. So it makes you, if you've got interest in cipher, it makes you want to find out, well, it's been done deliberately. Why? Let's find a solution. Well, let's start with this, just with the finger pointing. You'll see the finger goes to temples, but that comes under palaces and towers, which the finger is also kind of picking out as well. So it's the first 3 lines, and the N words of those lines. What's that telling us? Towers, palaces, temples. Well, these 3 are associated with philosophy, where you rise high in your mind, or you're looking at the stars and so on. You're the philosopher, astronomer, so on like that. You're in your ivory tower, if you like, thinking. You're a philosopher. Palaces is kingship and temples is priesthood. Philosophy, kingship, priesthood. This is a description, or it relates to Hermes Trismegistus, who was known as the philosopher, king, and priest. Hermes Trismegistus, the great philosopher, the great king, and the great priest. Hermes Trismegistus, which is exactly what you find too on the Shakespeare monument in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's put up in Holy Trinity Church. You find it's a Hermes Trismegistus dedication or description of who the author Shakespeare was. Then this is from Boki now, Thomas Bokenham, the numerology. A lot of cipher is associated with numerology, particularly in Kabbalah, Kabbalistic ones. Well, first of all, if you count up the number of letters in the whole memorial scroll inscription, it comes to 157. Now, this is an important number, so you can see why some letters have been left out to get this number, 157, because 157 in the simple cipher, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on, using Elizabethan alphabet, 24 letters. Then you get the signature of Fra Rosicrucian, which occurs again and again in all the printed original printed Shakespeare works. As this number of letters giving you this key signature. And then in number of complete words, if you count the complete words up, there are 33. Now you exclude in that towers, because towers is not complete, it's been shortened. So excluding towers, that's been shortened, you've got 33 complete words. 33 in simple cipher is Bacon, well-known cipher signature of Bacon, used again and again in different works by him. But if you count up the total words, including the towers, it's actually 34. Well, if you add 34 to 33, you get 67, and that's the cipher of Francis. So here, just in the number of words done in this way, you've got little You could say it doesn't prove anything, but you know it's a sign. It's a sign, you know, add it to all the other things, and you're really, really getting there. And then if you take the shortened, the shall dissolve, you know, it's the end of the first set of lines. You've got 6 lines, and those the letters of the first 6 lines add up to 103. And 103 in simple cipher is the name of Shakespeare. And then if you take the last lines, shall dissolve starts off reading the last bit, shall dissolve, and then the next 2 lines that follow, the last 3 lines. Then you've got the number of letters in that come to 67, which we've seen before means Francis in simple cipher. And then Thomas Bokenham, notice this, which I can't show you a picture of because it's been altered now, but I saw it myself, and he was right. Before the monument was restored in the 80s, I think it was done, early 80s, before that, you could read the word fabric, Fabrick. The A was actually an N, carved as an N. But of course, when it was you know, all done up again, restored, nobody understood that. They thought it was a mistake, so they've painted it over and made an A of it. So you can't get the cipher from it anymore. But if you were there originally, you would have seen that. It's also like underneath the whole memorial, they've now put big letters, William Shakespeare, Stratford-upon-Avon. It wasn't there before. They went and carved it in the early 80s. You know, it's sort of like the people who scrawl on walls everywhere, isn't it? It's a shame, but it's just people who didn't understand, didn't know what it's all about. But anyway, it alerted Boki to a cipher from Trithemius. Trithemius was an abbot Trithemius who was famous for cipher. He's associated with a book called Cryptominatices and other cipher books. He showed several different ciphers which Boki studied and worked with, and found that the people involved with Shakespeare were using these ciphers. So first of all, if you look at the letter A the letter N has been changed into an A, or fabric. Each side of it, you've got F and B. Interesting. FB. Could stand for Francis Bacon. And then if you take the shall dissolve as the starting point, then the N of the fabric is the 33rd letter of the final 3-line section, whose total letter count is 67, which I've already said. 33rd letter of that last 3 lines. And 33 is Bacon. And then in the simple cipher, N corresponds to the number 13. And that's the number of letters in shall dissolve, the indented line. It's 13 letters. And that straight away takes you to another Trithemius cipher, which is where you square the text, or you count every 13th letter through the text. So if you do that, I hope you can see on the picture, I've put in red the 13th letter. So if you take the F of the fabric as the starting point, the ensuing series of 13th letters, the first 6 of them are F-I-R-C-S-A. Then there's a few other letters after that. But the first 6 letters gives you an anagram of Francis. Then if you take the B as the starting point, which is the other side of the N of fabric, and go through 13 letters, you get the first few letters are B-N-C-O-H-A, and you discount an H. The H in cipher is counted as a null, has no number. So if you count in that way, it's a null, you have an anagram of Bacon, Francis Bacon. And I know other people have done even more work on this, but these are nice ones, I think, I've learned from Boki, which you can show it's from the Trithemius cipher systems that Trithemius writes about. And so you can follow it through very simply for yourselves. The other ciphers are a bit more complex. And then just to finish with, is this something I noticed? At the foot of the feet of Shakespeare is the signature of the sculptor, supposedly, TT 1787. I'm not sure if that's still there because they've done so much restoring now on it. They probably tried to scrub that out because it's embarrassing. Oh, still there. Oh, good. Still there. TT 1787. Well, the initials are not those of the sculptor. The sculptor is Peter Scheemakers. Wasn't the initials of the designer either. He was William Kent. And the date is not the date of when the memorial was either carved or erected. The memorial was erected in 1741. So why those initials and why that date? TT. Well, TT is a famous signature used very much still in Freemasonry, but it's a very, very ancient signature. TT, it can stand for 33, for instance. The capital letter code in Freemasonry, which they still use, I think, today. 33 can be represented by TT, the 33rd degree. But 33 also equals Bacon in the simple cipher. You can also refer to the 33rd degree of Freemasonry or the Rosy Cross, because the higher degrees in the old system were the Rosy Cross degrees. So you start off as a Freemason, then through Enlightenment you become the Rosicrucian. And it's known in all things I read about as the signature of the Supreme Council of the Sovereign Grand Inspector General, or generals. The semblance of this still continues to exist in the 33rd degree of the ancient accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, which is practiced more widely in America than in England. But it also, I found, is a signal that where's it been used previously that really stands out in a significant way with the date. And that's with Baconiana, which was published in 1679. And the editor of this was Thomas Tennyson, who became eventually an archbishop. But he was given all the manuscripts, unpublished manuscripts of Bacon from Thomas Mutis. And with the instructions, publish some of them if you feel it's right, but withhold others if you feel it's right. And he published some of what he felt was right in Baconiana, including one of Bacon's very, very important ciphers, which he gives the key to the cipher. It's called the Inquisition Cipher. But the other key thing about this, which Thomas Tennyson there signs himself as TT. In the book, he signs his introduction as TT, which means Thomas Tennyson, but it's also the TT signature. One can see that the publication in 1679 is exactly 108 years before the date of the 1787 carved on the Shakespeare Memorial. And in reverse cipher, 108 equals Francis. And also 108 is a key number in sacred tradition, and it refers to the 108 names of God in Kabbalah. It also is used as an important cycle in the Rosicrucian tradition. It's a fraction of an age of 2,160 years and of a great age of 12 times that. And it refers to alternate cycles of outer and inner activity of the Rosicrucian brotherhood or fellowship. Like an in-breath and an out-breath, in-breath and out-breath, every 108 years, which of course goes with the names of God, if you like. But it's a definite, recognized cycle that the Rosicrucians have used historically. Now, interesting, according to Michael Meyer, it was in 1570 that the older philosophical and initiatic societies were revived in England under the denomination of Brothers of the Golden Rose Cross. But 1570 old style is 1571 by modern reckoning. So it's really 1571. And at the same time, that same year, began the start of the great Arthurian tournaments in which the Queen acted as the Fairy Queen or Virgin Queen. And the Red Cross, the Red Cross and the Rose were the great symbols of St. George, the patron saint, and so on. And also at the same time, a very important publication came out, was Sir Henry Billingsley's first English translation of Euclid's Elements, with a mathematical preface by John Dee, because mathematics gives you a key to the higher laws of the universe, and to Cipher, of course. And this was 108 years prior to Baconi Arna. Sorry, gone the wrong way. So you've got these three. 1571, the Euclid's Elements, the Rosicrucian production, prefaced by John Dee. 108 years on, you've got Baconi Arna, the editor T.T., Thomas Tennyson. 108 years further on, you've got the signature T.T. and the date on the Shakespeare monument. 108 years, the cycles in that way. And 108, as I said, is Francis in reverse cipher and the names of God. Pretty special, isn't it? There we are. I'll end there.